My husband chose his mother over me on Christmas Day. I wish I could tell you that sentence arrived with drama. That it came with shouting, slammed doors, or a moment so clear I couldn't deny it. It didn't arrive softly, politely, almost kindly, and that's what made it hurt the most. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my marriage, I believed love was proven by patience. I believed if you waited long enough, stayed calm enough, gave enough grace, things would eventually fall into place. I believed marriage meant priority, not perfection, not fairy tales, just the quiet reassurance that when it mattered, you would not be standing alone. Christmas was supposed to be proof of that. I woke up before the alarm that morning, the house still wrapped in the pale blue light of winter, the kind of light that makes everything feel gentler than it really is. Daniel lay beside me, turned slightly away, his back rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. I watched him for a moment, listening to his breathing, and felt that familiar mix of love and loneliness settle in my chest. I didn't say anything. I never did. I slipped out of bed quietly and pulled a sweater around my shoulders. The floor was cold under my feet as I walked into the kitchen. The Christmas tree lights were still on from the night before, blinking softly in the corner, stubbornly cheerful. I stood there longer than necessary, holding my mug, staring at them. Today matters, I told myself. Just get through today. By mid-morning, the house had shifted into hosting mode, the invisible transformation where a home stops being yours and becomes a performance. I moved between the kitchen and the living room, mentally checking off tasks no one had asked me but everyone expected to be done. Food prepped, table set. Extra chairs ready. The smell of onions filled the kitchen, sharp and unforgiving. My eyes burned, and I let myself believe that was the only reason they watered. Daniel walked in, already dressed, already distracted. "Mom will be here around 11, he said, pouring himself coffee. He didn't look at me. "That's fine," I replied evenly. "I'll have everything ready." "Good," he said, nodding, already scrolling through his phone. "No thank you." "No, do you need help?" Just an assumption I had learned to carry quietly. When the doorbell rang, Daniel was on his feet instantly. "Mom," he said, smiling as he opened the door. Her presence filled the house before she did, confident, certain, unquestioned. She hugged him tightly, lingering just a second longer than necessary, then turned to me with a polite smile that felt practiced. "Merry Christmas, Emily," she said, like my name was a formality. "Merry Christmas," I replied. She stepped inside, scanning the room. "The coats should go over there," she said, pointing. "And I brought my own pie just in case." Just in case. I smiled. Of course I did. As more guests arrived, the noise grew, laughter bounced off the walls. Music played softly in the background. Chairs scraped against the floor. I moved through it all like a shadow, refilling glasses, answering questions, smoothing out details no one noticed until they were wrong. People spoke around me, sometimes through me. At one point, I leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "Can you help me bring out the extra chairs?" He hesitated, just long enough for hope to rise. "Mom needs me," he said quietly. "She's upset about where the table is." I waited. For reassurance. For "I'll be right back." For anything that sounded like I mattered. Nothing came. "Okay," I said. That word had become my survival language, short, calm, easy to swallow. Throughout the afternoon, small moments stacked on top of each other. His mother rearranged things I had already prepared. Daniel backed her decisions without checking with me. "She's just trying to help," he murmured once, when I gently questioned a change. I nodded, even as something tightened inside me. Dinner was loud and full of conversation, yet I felt strangely detached. Across the table, Daniel leaned toward his mother, listening intently, nodding, touching her hand, when she sighed about how exhausting the holidays were. I watched him give her the attention I had been quietly craving all day. I excused myself and stepped into the kitchen. The noise softened behind me, replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator. I rested my hands on the counter and closed my eyes. Why doesn't he look at me the way he looks at her? Why am I always the one adjusting? When did waiting start to feel like disappearing? I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. I looked tired, like someone who had been holding her breath for too long. When I returned to the living room, gifts were being opened. Laughter burst out over something small and harmless. The Christmas lights cast soft shadows across the walls. Daniel sat beside his mother, their shoulders almost touching. I stood there for a moment, unseen. And in that quiet second, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I realized I wasn't competing with his mother. I was competing with his comfort. And Christmas, with all its lights, traditions, and expectations, was simply the day that truth refused to stay hidden. I took my seat again, folded my hands in my lap and waited, not knowing yet that this would be the last time I ever waited the same way. The more I explained his silence, the quieter I became inside. The days after Christmas didn't explode into arguments. They thinned out. They stretched into that strange, uncomfortable quiet that comes after a truth brushes past you, but you pretend not to feel it. The house looked normal. Too normal. Wrapping paper was folded into trash bags. Half-burned candles still sat on the table, their scent faint but stubborn. Leftover food lined the refrigerator like evidence of a celebration that had already slipped into memory. Daniel sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, relaxed, untouched by whatever had followed me into this morning. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes," I said. I always said yes, because saying no required conversation. I was too tired to start. At the sink, I washed dishes that didn't need washing. My hands moved automatically, while my mind replayed the day before in pieces I couldn't organize properly. The way he leaned toward his mother when she spoke. The way my words dissolved into the noise. The way I waited for him to notice, and he didn't. It was just Christmas, I told myself. Holidays are stressful. He didn't mean it. Denial doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives dressed as reason. It tells you patience is maturity and silence is strength. Later that afternoon, his mother called. "I just wanted to make sure Daniel ate enough," she said lightly. "He barely touched the pie." Daniel smiled at the phone, nodding, reassuring her. "Yeah, Mom. I'm fine." He didn't mention that I had cooked all day. He didn't mention that I had barely sat down. When he hung up, I said carefully, "You were really attentive to her yesterday." He frowned slightly, like I'd brought up something inconvenient. "She's my mother, Emily." "I know," I said quickly. "I'm not saying." "She was overwhelmed," he continued. "You know how she gets." I nodded. Of course I did. That night, lying beside him in bed, I stared at the ceiling and began counting reasons not to feel hurt. He works hard. He's a good man. He doesn't yell. He doesn't cheat. As if love were only measured by the things someone doesn't do. The days slid back into routine. Work errands. Dinners eaten across from each other, while the television filled the space where conversation used to live. But something inside me stayed unsettled, like a question that had been asked but never answered honestly. One evening, folding laundry, I said softly, "Do you ever feel like I come second?" He paused, a shirt half folded in his hands. "Second to what?" I swallowed. "To your mother. To everything." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Why are you turning this into something it's not?" "I'm not," I said. "I'm just telling you how it feels." "Well," he replied, his voice sharper now, "feelings aren't always facts." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was loud, but because it was efficient. It erased my experience without raising its voice. I began noticing things I had trained myself not to see before. Plans changing when his mother needed something. My opinions being discussed later, privately, if at all. His loyalty showing up clearly, just not for me. At dinner one night I asked, "Do you think we could spend the next holiday just us?" He looked genuinely surprised. "Why would we do that?" "Because I miss you," I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're overthinking again." Overthinking became another way of saying stop talking. I mentioned it once to my friend Sarah, carefully, like the truth might shatter if I said it too loudly. "Does it ever feel like you're married to the whole family?" she asked gently. I laughed too fast. "It's not that bad." But my chest tightened as I said it. At night, I lay awake longer, listening to the house, listening to my own thoughts, wondering when love had started requiring so much patience and so little presence. I still believed time would fix it. I still believed waiting was loyalty. But a quieter question was growing stronger every day. How long do you wait before waiting becomes self-abandonment? Section 2 wasn't about action. It was about excuses. And it ended the way denial always does, with less comfort than before, and more truth pressing in. The first time I felt small at my own table, I knew silence was teaching him how to treat me. It happened at my own dining table. That's the part that still stings the most. Not in public. Not at someone else's house. But right there, in the space I had cleaned, prepared, and quietly offered as home. We were hosting dinner again. Not a holiday this time, just a family gathering that carried the same familiar weight. I had spent the afternoon cooking. The kind of careful cooking you do when you want everything to go smoothly. When you want no reason for tension, no excuse for disappointment. The table was set neatly. Candles lit. Food warm. The room smelled like roasted chicken and herbs, comforting and familiar. I told myself tonight will be different. Daniel's mother arrived early. As usual, she walked in like she belonged to the house more than I did, glancing around, assessing. "You moved the chairs," she said, not a question. "Yes," I replied. "It works better this way." She paused, lisped hers, "Well, we'll see." Daniel was right behind her. "Hi," I said, smiling at him. "Can you help me bring the salad out?" "In a minute," he said, already focused on his mother. "She needs help with her coat." I waited. Then I carried the bowl myself. As everyone settled at the table, conversation flowed easily, just not toward me. Stories were shared, jokes repeated, memories retold. I nodded, smiled, passed dishes, refilled glasses. At one point, his mother leaned back and said lightly, "Daniel, you remember how we always did dinners when you were younger? Everything had a system." She looked directly at me then, not hostile, just dismissive. Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, Mom was very particular. I waited for him to add something, anything that acknowledged me. He didn't. So organized," she continued. "Some people don't realize how much structure matters." I felt the heat rise to my face. "I think dinners can be warm without being rigid," I said gently. She smiled. "Oh, of course. Everyone has their own way." Daniel reached for the bread basket and passed it to her. Not to me. The conversation moved on. And I sat there, suddenly aware of my hands folded neatly in my lap, like a guest waiting to be excused. Later, when dessert was served, she sighed dramatically. "I suppose we'll manage," she said, glancing at the pie, "though I usually make it from scratch." "I did make this from scratch," I said quietly. "Oh," she replied, surprised. "Well, it's different." That word sat heavy between us. Daniel laughed softly. "She just means she's used to her own recipe." I looked at him. He didn't look back. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But enough for me to feel it. Why am I the only one feeling embarrassed right now? Why am I the only one aware this isn't okay? I excused myself and went into the kitchen. I stood at the sink, staring at the reflection of the table in the window glass. Everyone looked comfortable. At ease. Everyone except me. When Daniel came in a few minutes later, I said quietly, "That was uncomfortable." He frowned. "What was?" "The way she spoke to me," I said. "At the table." He sighed, like I'd inconvenienced him. "She didn't mean anything by it." "I know," I said. "But it made me feel small." "She's just honest," he replied. "You're too sensitive." Too sensitive. That phrase settled over me like a verdict. I realized then that my silence hadn't been neutral. It had been instructional. By staying quiet, I had taught him that my discomfort was manageable, that my dignity was flexible, that I would swallow things to keep the peace. I went back to the table, smiling again, nodding again, disappearing again. But inside, a question was forming. Sharper than before: if I don't defend myself, who will? That night, as I cleared the table alone, I understood something painful and undeniable. Silence doesn't protect love. It trains people on how little resistance they'll face. And for the first time, I wondered what it would cost me to keep being this quiet. The night I asked for support and realized I was asking the wrong person, I didn't plan the conversation. It slipped out of me the way truths do when they've been waiting too long. It was late. The house had finally gone quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after dishes are done, lights are dimmed, and there's nowhere left to hide behind business. The television murmured in the background. Some show neither of us was really watching. Daniel sat at the edge of the couch, scrolling on his phone. I sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm, far enough to feel the distance between us. I stared at the wall for a long moment before I spoke, because once you start telling the truth, you can't pretend you didn't mean it. "Can I ask you something?" I said. He didn't look up. "Sure." That word "sure" sounded generous. "It wasn't, 'I need you to listen,'" I added quietly. He sighed, finally locking his phone and placing it face down on the table. "I am listening." I swallowed. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, fingers digging into each other like they needed permission to exist. "I've been feeling unsupported," I said. "Especially when it comes to your mom." His jaw tightened immediately. "I'm not attacking her," I rushed to say. "I'm telling you how it feels to be me." He leaned back against the couch, arms crossing over his chest. "What exactly are you saying, Emily?" The way he said my name felt like a warning. "I'm saying," I continued carefully, "that when she dismisses me, or corrects me, or makes comments at the table, and you don't say anything, it hurts. It makes me feel alone." He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. You're reading too much into things. I looked at him. I'm telling you how it feels. And I'm telling you, he replied, that she doesn't mean it the way you're taking it. That sentence landed like a slap. So my feelings are wrong. I asked softly. That's not what I said. It's what you implied. He rubbed his temples, like this conversation was exhausting him. Emily, she's my mother. She's always been like this. You knew that when we got married. I felt something inside me tighten. So that means I just accept it. I asked. That I sit quietly while I feel disrespected in my own home. She's family, he said firmly. Family doesn't mean disrespect. I laughed, a small, breathless sound that surprised even me. Then why does it feel like it? He looked at me then, really looked at me, frustration written plainly across his face. Why do you always turn things into a problem? He asked. That question hurt more than anything else he'd said. I'm not turning it into a problem, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm telling you there already is one. Well, he replied, standing up now, pacing the room. I can't control how you feel. I'm not asking you, I said. I'm asking you to stand with me. He stopped pacing and looked at me sharply. Against my mother. No, I said quickly. With your wife. Silence filled the room. Heavy, unforgiving. He exhaled slowly. You're asking me to choose. The words echoed louder than he intended. I'm asking you to protect me, I said. From what? He snapped. Comments? Opinions? That's just how she is. That's just how she is, I repeated, stunned. And this is just how I'm supposed to feel. He shook his head. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Crying had never helped me feel heard. It only made me feel smaller. Do you know what it feels like? I asked quietly, to sit at a table you prepared and feel like you don't belong there. He looked away. That's not fair, he said. What's not fair? I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Is being told I'm overreacting when I'm finally brave enough to speak. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed again, a posture I was starting to recognize as his shield. I'm not going to fight with my mother over this, he said flatly. I stared at him. So that's it. I'm saying I'm not choosing sides, he replied. But the room felt very clear to me in that moment. Not choosing, I said slowly, is still a choice. He didn't respond. I don't need you to argue with her, I continued. I need you to acknowledge me. To say, Emily, I see you. He scoffed softly. You're being that word. Dramatic. Landed hard. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly. I am being honest, I said. And it took me a long time to get here. Well, he replied, his tone colder now. Honesty doesn't mean I have to agree. I nodded slowly, the truth settling in like a weight. You're right, I said. It doesn't. We stood there in silence, facing each other, the space between us suddenly larger than the room. I just don't understand why this is such a big deal to you, he added. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and realized something painful. He heard my words. But he wasn't listening, because, I said quietly, it's teaching me where I stand. He frowned. You're my wife. I waited for more. Nothing came. That was the moment I understood that I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking the wrong person. I walked back to the couch and sat down, feeling strangely calm. Something inside me had settled. Not because the problem was solved, but because the truth had finally stopped hiding. I had spoken. I had been clear, and he had shown me exactly how much space he was willing to make for me. Later that night, lying beside him, I stared into the darkness and replayed the conversation again and again. Not the words, the pauses, the way he defended her without hesitation. The way he questioned my feelings before questioning her behavior. The way he treated my pain like an inconvenience. I turned slightly toward him. He was already asleep. That hurt too, but differently. Because for the first time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking for support from someone who had already decided where his loyalty lived. And as painful as that realization was, it carried something else with it. Clarity. There is a strange peace that comes after you stop. One will suddenly become different. It doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like grief. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. After that night I didn't bring it up again. Not because it stopped hurting, but because something inside me finally understood that explaining myself wasn't changing anything. The house moved on like nothing had happened. Daniel woke up the next morning, made coffee, kissed my cheek out of habit, and asked what we had planned for the weekend. His voice was normal, comfortable, as if we hadn't just stood in the living room, dividing our marriage with silence. Nothing special, I said. And for the first time, I meant more than just the schedule. I watched him closely after that. Not angrily, not desperately, just honestly. I noticed how his mother's name still softened his tone immediately. How he answered her calls no matter what we were doing. How plans shifted the moment she needed something, while my needs waited politely in the background. One evening, while we were eating dinner, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and stood up without a word. "I'll be right back," he said. I nodded, chewing slowly, listening to his voice drift into the hallway. "Yes, Mom, no, that's fine, I can come by tomorrow." Tomorrow had been our day. I had reminded him twice. When he came back, I didn't ask who it was. "So tomorrow," I said carefully. "Are we still?" "I need to stop by Mom's," he interrupted. "She needs help with something." He said it like it was obvious. Like it had always been obvious. "Oh," I replied. That was all. I noticed how easily my plans disappeared. How often later became never. How my disappointment was treated like background noise. Something manageable, something expected. At his parents' house, I watched the way he changed. His shoulders relaxed, his voice grew lighter. He laughed more. He became attentive in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Daniel, can you pass me that?" his mother asked once. Immediately, he stood up. "Emily," I said quietly, later that night, "can you help me with the dishes?" "In a minute," he replied, eyes still on his phone. The difference was subtle. But it was consistent. That's when it started to sink in. People don't accidentally repeat the same behavior. They choose it. I stopped correcting her when she spoke over me. I stopped filling the silence when he withdrew. I stopped defending him to myself. Instead, I observed. At another family gathering, she made a comment about how I arranged the table. "I always did it differently," she said, smiling thinly. Daniel smiled too. "I know, Mom." I waited. He never added my name to the sentence. On the drive home, the silence stretched. "You were quiet?" he finally said. "I'm listening," I replied. "To what?" he asked. "To what you don't say," I answered. He didn't respond. That silence told me more than any argument ever had. I noticed how often he asked me to be patient. How rarely he asked himself to be brave. I noticed how compromise always leaned in one direction. How understanding was expected from me, but never required of him. I stopped asking why. Why keeps you trapped? Patterns set you free. One night, as I folded laundry, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of hoping for moments that never arrived. Tired of explaining feelings that were never absorbed. Tired of loving someone who loved comfort more than courage. Daniel walked past me and said casually, "Mom's thinking of spending more time with us. She misses how things used to be." I looked up. "Things used to be what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Simple, simple. Meaning before me." "I see," I said. That was it. No argument, no tears, no explanation. He looked relieved. That's when I knew something important. My silence had changed. Before, it was submission. Now, it was clarity. I wasn't quiet because I was afraid to speak. I was quiet because I was finally listening. Listening to the patterns. Listening to the priorities. Listening to the truth that kept showing up no matter how often I tried to rewrite it. Later that night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself a question that felt dangerous but necessary. If nothing changes, can I live like this? The answer didn't come immediately, but it didn't scare me the way it used to. Because false hope hurts more than clarity ever could. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for him to choose differently. I was starting to understand that he already had. The day his mother spoke for him, and I realized he was letting her, it happened in the middle of a sentence that wasn't meant to wound me. That's how I knew it was real. We were standing in his parents' living room, the kind of living room that still smelled faintly of furniture polish and old habits. Heavy curtains, framed family photos lining the walls. Every version of Daniel frozen in time, smiling, younger, obedient. I stood there as his wife, yet somehow still felt like a guest. His mother was talking. She was always talking. "I told Daniel," she said, waving her hand dismissively, "that it's better if we keep holidays traditional. Too much change only creates confusion." She said I told Daniel so casually. Like it was normal. Like it had already been agreed upon. I looked at him. He didn't look back. That was the moment. Not the words, not her tone. Once I waited for him to correct her. To say, "We decided." To say, "Emily and I talked about it." He said nothing. and suddenly, the room felt smaller. I didn't realize a decision had been made, I said calmly. My voice surprised me, steady, measured, almost detached. His mother smiled, the kind of smile that pretends innocence while delivering control. Oh, Daniel knows what I mean. I looked at him again. Do you? He shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the floor. Mom's just saying what makes sense. That sentence landed harder than any argument we'd ever had. So you agree? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I think she has a point, he finally said. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because something inside me clicked into place. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was permission. We sat down for dinner shortly after. The table was already set, by her, not me. The arrangement was familiar, intentional, untouched by my preferences. I noticed where I was seated. Slightly off-center, close enough to be present, far enough to be forgettable. She served Daniel first. Eat while it's hot, she said warmly. He smiled. Thanks, Mom. I watched the exchange like I was watching a scene I had already memorized. At one point, I said, I was thinking we could host Easter this year. Just us. Something smaller. Before Daniel could answer, she spoke. That won't work, she said gently. Daniel knows how important Easter is to me. She looked at him. He nodded. Just like that, no discussion, no pause, no acknowledgement that I was part of this marriage. I felt my chest tighten, but my face remained calm. I didn't ask what worked for you, I said carefully. I was sharing an idea. She tilted her head, studying me. And I'm telling you what's realistic. Daniel cleared his throat. She's just being practical, Emily. Practical. That word had been used to bury my needs more times than I could count. I pushed my chair back slightly, the sound scraping softly against the floor. Do you want to hear what I think? I asked him. He glanced at his mother before answering. About what? About us. But I didn't say that? No, I said quietly. Never mind. Because the answer was already in front of me. Later, as we helped clear the table, she handed Daniel a dish towel. You remember how I like the glasses dried, she said. I know, he replied immediately. I stood there holding a stack of plates, invisible. In the car on the way home, the silence was thick. You were quiet, he said finally. I was listening, I replied. To what? He asked, annoyed now. To the way decisions are made, I said. And who gets to make them? He sighed. Yeah, taking this too personally. I turned to look at him. Tell me something, I said. When she spoke for you today, did you feel uncomfortable? He didn't answer right away. No, he admitted. That single word burned. So it feels normal to you, I said softly. It's just how it's always been, he replied. That was the truth I had been circling for months. Always. I realized then that he wasn't trapped between two women. He wasn't confused. He wasn't torn. He was comfortable. Comfortable letting her decide. Comfortable letting her speak. Comfortable letting me adjust. And the most painful part wasn't that she spoke for him. It was that he let her. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared into the darkness and replayed the day. The way she said I told Daniel. The way he didn't object. The way my presence felt optional. I understood something then. Something sharp and irreversible. Loyalty doesn't announce itself with speeches. It reveals itself in who someone allows to speak for them. And that day, his mother didn't just speak for him. She replaced me in places I didn't even know I was losing. I turned slightly toward him. He was already asleep, and for the first time, that didn't hurt the way it used to. Because confusion had left the room, and clarity had taken its place. The quiet way I started pulling back, and how no one noticed at first. I didn't leave. I didn't threaten. I didn't announce anything. I simply stopped reaching. That's how it begins when a woman finally protects herself. Not with noise, but with distance so subtle it looks like nothing at all. The mornings stayed the same. Coffee brewed. Toast popped. Daniel kissed my cheek on his way out the door like a habit he hadn't examined in years. Have a good day, he said. You too, I replied. What changed wasn't the routine. It was the effort behind it. I stopped reminding him of things. Stopped adjusting my schedule to fit his. Stopped preparing conversations in my head before speaking, only to abandon them mid-thought. When he forgot an errand we'd discussed, I didn't follow up. When plans shifted without warning, I didn't rearrange myself around them. I let the silence land where it belonged. At first, it felt wrong, like I was failing at something I had trained myself to do well, caring, compensating, keeping things smooth. But then something else crept in. Relief. Not happiness. Not freedom. Just relief from carrying everything alone. Daniel didn't notice, That was the part that stung. One evening he came home late. Sorry, he said, dropping his keys on the counter. Mom needed help again. I figured, I said. He paused, surprised by how easily the words left my mouth. You okay? He asked. Yes, I said. And this time I meant it not because I was fine, but because I had stopped waiting for him to make me feel okay. We ate dinner quietly. He talked about his day. I listened, nodded, asked the polite questions. But I didn't volunteer stories from mine. I didn't reach across the table. I didn't fill the space when conversation thinned. The television stayed off. Silence settled between us like a third presence. You're quiet lately, he said, finally. I know, I replied. Everything all right? Really looked. This man had lived comfortably inside my effort for years. Yes, I said again. He accepted it. That's when I realized how invisible I had become. The next weekend, his mother called while we were folding laundry. She needs help with something, he said automatically, already grabbing his keys. I didn't stop him. I'll be back later, he added. Okay? I said. He hesitated at the door as if expecting resistance. It never came. He left. Hours passed. Then evening. I cooked for myself. I ate alone. I cleaned up without resentment. Because resentment requires hope, and I was finally letting that go. When he came back, he looked unsettled. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said. He nodded slow, like he didn't quite understand what had changed, only that something had. At family gatherings, I spoke less, smiled politely. Excused myself earlier. I stopped trying to prove I belonged in rooms that treated me like furniture. His mother didn't comment. Why would she? My silence made her job easier. Daniel didn't comment either. That's when it hit me, not sharply, but steadily. If my absence doesn't cause concern, what does that say about my presence? One night, I didn't wait up for him. I went to bed early, the room dark and quiet when he finally slipped in hours later. He paused, standing beside the bed. You didn't text, he said. I didn't think I needed to. I replied, eyes closed. He stood there longer than usual. You used to worry, he said. I opened my eyes and looked at him. I used to. I agreed. That was the first time he looked unsettled. The truth is, when you stop performing your role, people notice, but not immediately. First comes confusion, then inconvenience, and only later, if at all, concern. I started doing things for myself, small things, quiet things. I took walks alone. I read in silence. I made plans without explaining them. When I didn't attend a family dinner, his mother asked, "Where's Emily?" I think she had something else to do, Daniel replied. No follow-up. No curiosity. I heard about it later, not from him, from Sarah. Are you okay? She asked gently over coffee. You seem lighter. I'm just tired of carrying everything, I said. She nodded. People notice when you stop. I smiled sadly. Not the ones I expected. At home, Daniel seemed restless. You don't talk much anymore, he said one evening. I say what needs to be said, I replied. And what's that? Less than before, I said. He laughed nervously, unsure how to place that answer. I watched him struggle with something he couldn't name. The discomfort of not being centered in my world anymore. That night, as I lay awake, a realization settled over me like a calm truth. I wasn't pulling back to punish him. I was pulling back to survive. And the most painful discovery wasn't that he didn't chase after me. It was that he didn't even notice I had moved. I turned onto my side, facing the window, and whispered a question into the dark. How small have I been, if my absence feels the same as my presence? The question didn't break me. It steadied me. Because once you see how invisible you've become, you stop wasting energy trying to be seen. It took someone outside my marriage to notice what the people inside it had stopped seeing. That realization didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, like everything else that mattered. I was sitting across from Aunt Helen at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone cold. The house was calm in that late, afternoon way, sunlight stretching across the counter, dust floating like it had nowhere urgent to be. Daniel had stepped out to take a call. His mother's course, and the silence between us felt unusually honest. Aunt Helen didn't speak right away. She rarely did. She watched, she listened. She noticed the spaces people left behind. You don't talk much anymore, she said gently. The words landed like a tap on the shoulder. Not an accusation. Not concern dressed as drama. Observed true. I talk, I replied. Just less, she nodded. I know. I waited for her to say more. She waited longer. You used to explain everything, she continued. Now you just sit. I felt my chest tighten. I got tired of explaining things no one was changing. I said before I could stop myself. She studied me, eyes kind but clear. That's not withdrawal, she said softly. That's protection. The word hung between us. Protection. No one had framed it that way before. To Daniel, my quiet had been convenient. To his mother, it had been confirmation. To me, it had felt like I should apologize for. Aunt Helen sipped her tea. When a woman gets quiet, she said, it's usually because she's been loud for a long time, and no one listened. I swallowed hard. I thought of every conversation I'd rehearsed and abandoned. Every feeling I'd softened so it wouldn't offend. Every okay I'd used to patch over disappointment. Daniel walked back into the room mid-thought. What are you two talking about? He asked casually. Amelie, Aunt Helen said, meeting his eyes, has been carrying a lot quietly. Daniel laughed lightly. She's just tired. I didn't correct him. Aunt Helen didn't either. She turned back to me. Do you feel tired? She asked. Or do you feel unseen? The question cracked something open. Both, I admitted. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Come on, he said. We're just busy. Everyone's busy. Aunt Helen didn't argue. She didn't lecture, she simply said, busy doesn't erase responsibility. The room went still. Daniel cleared his throat. I need to get back. He muttered, glancing at his phone. Mom's waiting. Of course she was. After he left, Aunt Helen reached across the table and touched my hand. I've watched this family a long time, she said. Silence here has always been mistaken for agreement. My heart pounded. And disagreement, she added, has always been punished. I nodded slowly. I don't want to cause problems, I said. She smiled sadly. You didn't cause them. You revealed them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words replayed in my mind, not loudly but persistently, like a truth that had finally found its voice. The next day, I noticed how often people spoke around me instead of to me, how decisions were announced instead of discussed, how my quiet had become a shortcut for convenience. At dinner, Daniel talked about plans with his mother without once looking at me. We'll handle it, he said confidently. I set my fork down. Who's we? I asked calmly. He blinked, surprised. Well, Mom and I. A pause. I nodded. Okay. That was all. But Aunt Helen's voice echoed in my head, silence mistaken for agreement. Later, Sarah called. You okay? She asked. I think I've been invisible, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Being invisible hurts, she said. But being seen? Really seen? Changes things. That eve Daniel mentioned another family dinner. Mom's hosting, he said. You coming? I hesitated. Just long enough to feel the weight of the question. I'm not sure, I said. He frowned. Why not? Because I don't know if there's space for me there, I replied. He scoffed lightly. You're overthinking? I didn't argue. I just said, maybe. That word unsettled him more than any speech ever had. Later, when I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair in the quiet bedroom, I barely recognized myself. Not because I'd changed physically, but because I could finally see the outline of someone who had been shrinking. And the thing about being seen, even once, is that you can't unsee yourself after. Aunt Helen had noticed my silence. And in doing so, she had given it meaning. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't surrender. It was a signal. And now that I understood its cost, I knew I couldn't afford to stay invisible much longer. I didn't practice this one in my head. That's how I knew it was different. Every other conversation had been rehearsed, trimmed of sharp edges, padded with kindness, edited so it wouldn't upset anyone. This one arrived whole, unapologetic, calm. It sat in my chest like a settled decision. It happened on an ordinary evening. No audience. No holiday lights. Just the living room, dim in the hum of the dishwasher in the background. The clock ticking louder than usual. Daniel sat across from me, legs stretched out, remote in hand. He looked comfortable, safe, unaware. I watched him for a moment and realized something quietly terrifying. I was no longer afraid of losing his approval. Daniel, I said. He muted the TV. Yeah. I'm not going to explain this, I continued. I'm just going to say it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Okay. I don't feel like your wife, I said. I feel like an accessory that gets moved when it's inconvenient. He let out a small laugh, reflexive. That's dramatic. I didn't react. I'm not finished. That stopped him. When decisions are made, I said evenly, they're made with your mother. When plans change, they change for her. When there's tension, you expect me to absorb it quietly. And when I speak, you call it overthinking. He shifted in his seat. You're exaggerating. No, I replied. I'm summarizing. Silence pressed in. The good kind. The honest kind. I'm not asking you to choose, I continued. I'm telling you what I won't continue participating in. His jaw tightened. And what's that? A marriage where I'm consistently second, I said. A home where my comfort is optional. Conversations where my feelings are treated like inconveniences. He stood up, pacing now. You're making ultimatums. I'm setting boundaries, I corrected. There's a difference. He stopped pacing and stared at me. So what? I'm supposed to just cut my mother off? I shook my head. No, I'm asking you to stop letting her speak for you. To stop deciding things about us without me. To stop dismissing my reality because it's uncomfortable. That's just how my family works, he said sharply. And this, I replied calmly, is how I work. You've changed. Yes, I said. I have. The word landed cleanly. Without apology. I used to soften everything, I continued. I used to explain myself until I sounded unsure. I used to make myself smaller so the room could stay calm. I'm not doing that anymore. He shook his head, frustrated. So what happens now? I met his eyes. Now you decided there's room for me to stand fully in this marriage. That sounds like pressure, he said. It's reality, I replied. Pressure is pretending nothing's wrong. He looked away. I'm not angry, I added. I'm clear. That was the part he didn't know how to fight. You've never talked like this before, he said quietly. Because I was hoping you'd notice without me having to, I replied. You didn't. The room felt suspended, like it was waiting for him to step forward. He didn't. I need time, he said finally. I nodded. Take it? That surprised him. You're not going to push? He asked. No, I said. I'm not here to persuade you. He searched my face for something, fear maybe. Desperation. He didn't find it. That night, lying in bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness, not numbness, not resignation. Stillness. The kind that comes when you finally stop negotiating your worth. The next morning, his mother called. I watched him answer, his voice immediately softening. Yeah, Mom, I know we'll talk. He glanced at me mid-call. I didn't look away. After he hung up, he said, she wants to come by this weekend? I won't be available, I replied. He blinked. What do you mean? I said, picking up my keys. I won't rearrange myself for plans I wasn't included in. He frowned. You're being difficult. I paused at the door and turned back to him. No, I said calmly. I'm being honest. He didn't stop me as I left. Outside, the air felt colder than usual. Cleaner. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, breathing deeply, grounding myself in the quiet. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to see how he'd react. I had already said what needed to be said. And the truth, spoken plainly, without rehearsal, felt lighter than all the softened versions I'd carried before. The moment you draw a line, something unexpected happens. The noise stops. Not because everything is suddenly fixed, but because you stopped filling the silence with explanations. That was the first thing I noticed. The house felt different after that conversation. Not tense, not explosive. Just empty in places that used to be crowded with my effort. The couch where Daniel used to sit scrolling through his phone felt farther away. The kitchen sounded louder without my constant movement, my constant adjusting. Clarity had created space, and space is terrifying when you've spent years shrinking to keep things together. Daniel didn't speak much that week. Neither did I. We moved around each other politely, cautiously, like two people learning the shape of a room after the furniture has been rearranged. He made coffee in the mornings. I made my own. We exchanged updates the way Quirkers do, efficient, distant, careful not to touch anything fragile. You working late? He asked one evening. Yes, I replied. That was it, no follow-up, no curiosity, and that hurt more than I expected. Because part of me had hoped, quietly, foolishly, that drawing a boundary would make him step closer, that he would notice the space and rush to fill it with understanding. Instead, he seemed relieved. That realization landed slowly, but it landed hard. The first real test came that weekend. His mother called. I knew before he even said anything. I could hear the shift in his tone from across the room. Yeah, Mom, I know we'll figure it out. He hung up and turned toward me. She's coming by on Sunday, he said. I didn't respond right away. I set my book down, folded the corner of the page, and looked at him. I won't be here? I said calmly. He frowned. What do you mean you won't be here? I mean I made other plans, I replied. What plans? I paused. Plans I didn't need approval for. That silence that followed was sharp. You're doing this on purpose, he said. No, I answered. I'm doing this honestly. He rubbed his face, frustrated. This is exactly what I mean. You're creating distance. No. I said again. Distance was already there. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. He didn't argue after that. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't ask where I was going. Sunday came. I woke up early, not because I had somewhere urgent to be, but because staying felt heavier than leaving. I took a shower, got dressed slowly, deliberately, and packed a small bag. Daniel watched from the doorway, unreadable. You don't have to go, he said finally. I looked at him. You didn't ask me to stay. He didn't reply. I left. I spent the afternoon alone. A cafe, a long walk. Quiet corners of the city where no one expected anything from me. The absence felt strange at first, like I'd forgotten something important. Then it felt peaceful. Later that evening, Sarah called. How'd it go? She asked. I said. There was a pause. And the house didn't collapse, I replied. She laughed softly. That's usually how it goes. When I came home, the lights were on. Daniel sat at the table, his mother gone. The house returned to its usual order. She asked where you were, he said. And what did you say? That you had plans. I nodded. Good. He studied me for a long moment. You're really serious about this, he said. Yes, I replied. That answer seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever had. Over the next few days, the space grew clearer. He didn't defend his mother anymore. Not because he understood, but because he didn't want another conversation. He avoided topics that required effort. He filled his time elsewhere, and I watched. I watched how quickly he adjusted to a version of marriage that asked less of him. I watched how rarely he asked how I felt. I watched how space revealed truth faster than words ever could. The fear came at night. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I had gone too far. If drawing a line had quietly erased me from the picture, instead of securing my place in it. What if he chooses distance? What if clarity costs me everything? Those thoughts crept in when the house was dark and my resolve felt thinner. But then another thought followed, steadier, quieter. What did staying silent cost me? That question anchored me. One evening, Daniel said, "This doesn't feel like a marriage anymore." I looked at him. It didn't feel like one before either. I replied. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I don't know what you want from me, he said. I want you to notice, I said. And if you don't, I want to know that too. He didn't answer. And that answer was loud. Space doesn't lie, doesn't negotiate. It simply shows you who is willing to step forward, and who is comfortable stepping back. That week, I learned something difficult and freeing. Boundaries don't guarantee closeness. They guarantee truth. And truth, even when it scares you, is better than living inside a hope that keeps shrinking you. I went to bed that night knowing one thing for certain. Whatever came next, I would meet it standing upright. He never said the words out loud. He didn't need to. Some choices announce themselves quietly, through absence, through delay, through what never changes even after everything has been said. After I drew the line, I waited for something. Not an apology, not a grand gesture, just movement. But days passed, then weeks, and what I saw instead was stillness. Not the calm kind, but the comfortable kind. The kind that settles in when someone has already decided, and doesn't feel the need to explain. Daniel adjusted to the space easily. That's how I knew. He stopped asking questions that required real answers. He stopped checking in beyond the basics. Our conversations shrank into logistics, groceries, schedules, bills. The emotional weight of us was quietly removed, like furniture that had become inconvenient. One evening, as we sat across from each other eating dinner, he said, "Mom's thinking of staying with us for a while." The words were casual. Too casual? I set my fork down slowly. How long is a while? I asked. He shrugged. She hasn't decided? And you? I asked. He didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. I told her it should be fine, he said finally. There it was. No discussion, no invitation for input, no recognition that this affected me too. I see, I said. He looked relieved, like he'd braced himself for resistance that never came. That relief hurt more than the decision itself. That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing, realizing something heavy and undeniable. He wasn't confused. He wasn't torn. He was choosing. Every day. And I was finally brave enough to see it. The next weekend, he left early to help her with something again. I'll be back later, he said, grabbing his jacket. Okay. I replied. He paused, waiting. For anger, for tears, for negotiation. None came left. I spent the day alone, not feeling abandoned, feeling clarified. I cleaned slowly, deliberately. I opened windows, I let light into rooms I'd kept dim for too long. Clarity has a sound. It's quiet, but it echoes. When he came back that evening, he talked about her. What she needed, what she said, what she wanted next. He didn't ask about my day. I realized then that I had been removed from the center life without ceremony. And the strange thing was, once I stopped resisting that truth, it stopped hurting as much. One night, Sarah, anything changed since you spoke up? Yes, I said. She waited. I stopped lying to myself. That was the strength I hadn't expected. Not confidence, not power, honesty. I noticed how often he chose the path of least resistance, and how rarely that path led toward me. I noticed how comfort guided his loyalty more than intention ever had. And I stopped asking him to be different. Because asking someone to change when they've shown you who they are is just another way of abandoning yourself. The final confirmation came quietly. We were invited to a family event, one I knew his mother had planned without me. Are you coming? He asked. I looked at him. Do you want me there? He hesitated. That's not what I asked. That's my answer, I said. He nodded, accepting it easily. Too easily. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, lights low, the house still, I realized something that felt both painful and freeing. He had made his choice long ago. I had just finally believed him. And belief, real belief, changes everything. I stopped waiting for conversations that would never happen. Stopped hoping for realizations that require courage he didn't have. Stopped measuring my worth against his comfort. I wasn't angry. I was awake. I packed a small bag the next morning. Not to leave forever, not yet, but to prove something to myself. I could step away without falling apart. When I told him I'd be staying elsewhere for a few days, he nodded. If that's what you need, he said. That was it. No panic, no reaching, no fear of losing me. And in that moment, the last illusion dissolved. I didn't feel rejected. I felt released. Because strength isn't forcing someone to choose you. Strength is choosing yourself when they don't. That night, lying alone in a quiet room that wasn't ours, I felt something unexpected settle into my chest. Peace. Not the happy kind. The honest kind. The kind that comes when you stop mistaking silence for hope. I didn't wake up that morning with courage pounding in my chest. I woke up with something quieter. Something steadier. Clarity. The room I was in wasn't mine. That was the first thing I noticed. The walls were bare, unfamiliar, untouched by shared memories. No wedding photo leaning crooked on a shelf. No laundry basket filled with clothes that weren't mine to fold. No history humming softly in the corners, asking me to explain myself. Just silence. And for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like punishment. I sat on the edge of the bed, feet flat on the floor, and breathed. Not the shallow, careful breathing I had mastered in my marriage. The kind that keeps you agreeable. But a deep breath that reached somewhere lower, somewhere honest. This wasn't running away. This was arriving. My phone lay face down beside me. I knew what was on it. Missed calls. Messages that sounded polite, cautious, unfinished. I didn't reach for it immediately. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. There were faint lines near my eyes I didn't remember earning. Shadows under them that spoke of long nights, spent waiting instead of sleeping. But there was something else there too. Something new. I looked like a woman who had stopped negotiating with reality. When I finally picked up the phone, there was one message from Daniel. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long moment before replying. We already did. The dots appeared almost immediately. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. He called. I answered, not because I felt obligated, but because I no longer felt afraid. Emily, he said. His voice sounded tired, stripped of authority. I don't want this to end like this. I leaned against the window, watching morning light spill onto the street below. It isn't ending suddenly, I said calmly. It's ending honestly. That makes it sound so final, he replied. It is, I said. Silence stretched between us. I could almost hear him searching for the version of me that used to soften everything. I've been thinking, he said. Maybe we both made mistakes. I closed my eyes. Daniel, I said gently, this isn't about assigning blame anymore. Then what is it about? He asked. It's about truth, I answered, and what I can live with. He exhaled slowly. I never meant for you to feel second. I know, I said. And I meant it. But meaning doesn't undo pattern. That feels unfair, he said quietly. So did my silence, I replied. Another pause. Is there really no way back? He asked. I thought about all the times I had asked that question silently. Nights I lay awake beside him, waiting for proof that never arrived. There might have been, I said honestly. Before I learned to stop abandoning myself. He didn't respond. I'm not angry, I continued. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm just done shrinking. Done, he repeated. Yes, I said, done waiting to be chosen. When the call ended, I felt the weight of it, not crushing, but real. Grief doesn't disappear just because clarity arrives. It walks beside you for a while. But it no longer leads. I packed slowly. Not frantically. Not emotional. My placed into my bag felt intentional. Clothes I chose for myself. Books I loved. Things that belonged to me, not us. When I reached the bottom drawer and found something he'd given me years ago, I paused. Then I closed the drawer. Some things don't need to follow you forward to be honored. I stepped outside later that morning, suitcase rolling behind me, the sound grounding. The air was cold but clean, the kind of cold that wakes you up instead of numbing you. People passed me on the sidewalk, unaware that something enormous had shifted inside me. That was okay. Not every ending needs an audience. I stopped at a cafe and ordered coffee, sat by the window, watched life move at its ordinary pace. And somewhere between the first sip and the quiet hum of conversation around me, it hit me I wasn't waiting for him to call back. That realization felt like freedom. Sarah texted me. You okay? I smiled faintly and typed back I'm standing. She replied almost instantly. That's my girl. Later that afternoon, I met Aunt Helen. She didn't ask questions. She never did. She simply looked at me, then nodded. You look different, she said. I feel different, I replied. She smiled gently. That's what happens when a woman stops asking permission to exist. We sat together quietly for a while. No advice, no speeches. Just presence. On the drive to my new place, memories surfaced. Christmas lights blinking softly, dinner tables where I felt small, moments I tried to explain away. But they didn't stab the way they used to. They felt complete. Like chapters that had reached their final page. That evening, alone in a new space that echoed slightly when I walked, I placed my bag down and sat on the floor. I didn't cry. Instead, I let myself reflect. I thought about everything that story had taught me. Not about him, not about his mother, but about me. I learned that love without respect is loneliness. No matter how patient you are, that silence can protect you, until it teaches others to overlook you. That being chosen once is meaningless if you're abandoned daily in small ways. I learned that waiting doesn't make someone love you better. It only teaches you how long you're willing to wait. And I learned the hardest truth of all, some people don't lose you suddenly. They lose you slowly, the moment you stop shrinking to fit their comfort. That night, I wrote something down. Not a goodbye letter, not a list of regrets, a promise. I promised myself I would never compete with anyone for my place again. I promised myself I would listen to patterns, not excuses. I promised myself I would speak once, clearly, and believe what followed. Some people remain a chapter, not the whole book. And some endings aren't failures, they are initiations. I turned off the light, lay down that hadn't learned my shape yet, and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, my chest felt calm, not empty, not afraid, whole. I didn't just survive that Christmas. I became someone who would never be lonely in love again. If you've stayed with me until here, then you already know this story was never just about Christmas. Christmas was only the mirror. What shattered me wasn't one holiday, one dinner table, or one sentence spoken too softly to protest. What changed me was the slow understanding of what happens when love asks you to disappear in small, daily ways. I want to tell you what this story means now, not as a wife who waited, not as a woman who endured, but as someone who finally learned to stand without apology. For years, I thought strength meant staying calm. I thought dignity meant swallowing discomfort. I thought love meant patience so deep it erased my own needs. No one teaches women how dangerous that belief can be. Because patience, when it's one-sided, doesn't make love stronger. It makes you quieter, smaller, easier to overlook. I didn't lose my marriage all at once. I lost myself gradually, in the pauses, in the, okay, I said when I wanted to say, this hurts. In the way I explained away behavior that should have been confronted, simply because confrontation felt like failure. And here's the truth I learned too late. But you don't have to. You don't wake up one day invisible. You become invisible the moment your pain is treated like inconvenience and you accept it as normal. Love should never feel like a competition. Not with a mother, not with tradition, not with comfort. If you ever find yourself competing for space in your own relationship, something has already gone wrong. The most painful part of my story isn't that my husband chose his mother. It's that I spent so long choosing silence. Silence felt safe. Silence felt mature. Silence felt like peace. But silence was teaching everyone around me that I could be moved without consequence. And when I finally stopped speaking softly, when I stopped rehearsing, when I stopped shrinking, I discovered something terrifying and freeing at the same time. Some people don't rise when you stand tall. They step back. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're finally honest. My boundary didn't come with shouting or ultimatums. It came with stillness. I stopped adjusting, stopped compensating, stopped translating my worth into something more palatable. And the moment I did that, the truth revealed itself without cruelty. Those who benefit from your silence will always core clarity. Too much. But clarity isn't cruelty. It's self-respect finding its voice. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving. I walked away because I finally understood that love without respect is loneliness. And loneliness inside a marriage is the most isolating place a person can be. Here's what I want you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, to understand deeply. You are not dramatic for wanting to be prioritized. You are not selfish for asking to be considered. You are not difficult for naming what hurts. You are human. And your needs don't require permission to exist. If someone tells you, that's just how they are, remember this, that may be true, but you get to decide how you respond to it. You are allowed to stop explaining. You are allowed to stop waiting. You are allowed to stop hoping that love will eventually feel less lonely. Boundaries are not threats. They are truth spoken calmly. And calm truth is powerful. I didn't get revenge. I didn't get closure wrapped in apologies. I didn't get a dramatic moment where everything made sense. What I got was better. I got myself back. I learned that peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself before resentment hardens your heart. I learned that actions speak even when words stay polite. I learned that absence can be an answer, and clarity doesn't need confirmation. Some people remain a chapter, not the whole book. And that's not bitterness. That's acceptance. This story ends without shouting because real healing doesn't make noise. It settles. It steadies. It strengthens. I didn't walk away broken. I walked away awake. Awake to the kind of love I will never accept again. Awake to the version of myself that no longer negotiates dignity. Awake to the truth that the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting to be chosen. If this story found you while you're still waiting, still adjusting, still hoping, I want you to know something with certainty. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to walk away from anything that requires you to disappear. Endings don't always come to destroy you. Some endings come to introduce you to the person you were becoming all along. Before the screen goes dark, before life pulls you back into its noise, I want to sit with you here for one more moment. Not as a narrator. Not as a character. Just as Emily. Because this wasn't a story meant to be heard and forgotten. It was meant to be felt and carried. If any part of this story made your chest tighten, if any silence in it sounded familiar, if you recognized yourself in the waiting, the hoping, the adjusting, then please know this. You are not weak for staying as long as you did. You are not foolish for believing love would change. You are not broken because it hurt quietly. Some of the strongest hearts break without making a sound. And some of the bravest people heal without applause. If you're still in a place where you feel unseen, if you're loving someone who doesn't look at you the way you deserve, if you're telling yourself, maybe tomorrow, the way I once did, I want you to remember this one thing from me. Love should never require you to disappear. You don't have to rush. You don't have to decide tonight. You don't have to be ready yet. But one day, maybe sooner than you think, you'll feel a quiet moment of clarity. And when that moment comes, please listen to it. That's not fear speaking. That's yourself, respect waking up. If this story felt like a mirror, if Emily's voice felt like it could have been your own, don't leave silently. Tell me in the comments. Which moment in this story felt like your life? Where are you listening from today? I read every single message, because this channel isn't just stories. It's a place where quiet hearts are finally heard. And if this story gave you words for feelings you've been carrying alone, please support this channel by tapping subscribe, so you don't miss the next story, the next truth, the next moment of healing that finds you exactly when you need it. You can also support this work with a super thanks. Your kindness helps keep these stories alive, stories that hold pain gently, and turn silence into strength. Until we meet again, take care of yourself in the small ways, trust what you feel, and never forget, some endings don't take something from you. They give you back to yourself. I'll see you in the next story. where another heart finds the courage to speak, and another truth finally comes home.